Alright guys, hey, how you guys doing? So, I'm going to talk a little bit about Bread Dungeon right now, and what I want to kind of address in this mini guide is how do you do Bread Dungeon? And for a lot of veteran players, it's very clear. You know, once you know kind of the secrets to doing Bread Dungeon, it becomes a lot simpler to do. But to get started out, when you're starting out the game, you might not know how to farm this dungeon, and there's one very easy trick to beating this dungeon, and that trick is actually just clicking on the boss's portrait. If you look at the boss's portrait, you can see that what they are hit by and what they are weak against. And for the first like 6 or 7 levels, you don't necessarily have to use the chain to kill them. But beyond that level, what you'll start encountering is that you have to use the correct chain against these bosses, because using the wrong chain against them will actually get you killed. It'll boost the enemy's attack power, you'll do 0 damage or you'll heal them, and on the counterattack they'll do a lot of damage to you because you're boosting their attack power. So it's the first and simplest and most major tip for Bread Dungeon is simply checking the boss and seeing what chain you should use on them. Is it a 1 chain, a 2 chain, or a 3 chain? And it kind of goes in order. So floor 1 is 1 chains, floor 2 is 2 chains, floor 3 is 3 chains, and then rinse and repeat. So that is one major tip for doing Bread Dungeon. The other major tip for Bread Dungeon is that when you get to bosses like on floor 9, the boss is hit best by characters who do multiple hits with their skills. And what I mean by that is a character whose block skills, for example, R over 9000, right here, when she fires her arrows, you know, her 3 chain arrows, she actually fires around 20 arrows, and that hits the boss 20 times for the correct chain. Now, we mentioned earlier how you have to use the correct chain against the boss. Well, using the correct chain against the boss is how you damage him. It is also how you stun the boss and cause him to lose any buffs he might have acquired by hitting him with the wrong chain. So, using the correct chain on him, first, does a lot of damage. Second, stuns him. And also makes him vulnerable to all normal attacks and skills if he is stunned. So those are 3 reasons you should use the correct chain, and the fact that that is the only way to beat some of these, well, that's not the only way, but it's one of the key ways of beating most of these stages. Now, when I say that about using the correct chain, that is actually most of what matters. And you also want to use multiple hits, like R over 9000 chain. And I'll actually show you right now why that is. It's easier to show through example rather than talk about it. But what we're going to do here is we're going to bring R over 9000 chain, and even though she's only a 4-star character, she's going to do a lot of damage to this boss. And the reason for that is because when she does the correct chain, each of the hits that she does on the boss is going to account for 1000 damage. So you see the boss right now has 2,100 or 215,000 health, right? Now, if we do a 3 chain, even though she's only a 4-star, the boss took about 20,000 damage. The reason for that is because each of the individual hits of her correct 3 chain does about 1,000 damage. So, even though her attack power might not be very high compared to someone like a 6-star Leon, the fact that she's using the correct chain is doing 1,000 damage per hit of the correct chain. Now, so kind of what is most important is actually using a character that does multiple hits, and then using an attack that does the correct chain on those hits. So, or that you use a correct chain when you're doing those hits. Because even though she's only a 4-star character, she's doing a lot of damage. In fact, she's doing more damage than a Leon could do in a comparable amount of time. Because if you use a character like a 6-star Leon, when he does a 3 chain, he only does 1 or 2 instances of damage, and that only hits the boss for about 1,000 damage plus whatever his regular attack is. So it is much more efficient to use a character that does multiple hits upon attack, rather than using a 6-star character that only does 1 or 2 hits every chain they do. Because each hit of the correct chain does 1,000 damage, just a flat 1,000 damage. And so that is one of the keys to doing Bread Dungeon. Now you might ask, okay, so if the idea is to use a character who does multiple hits, on the boss with a correct chain. What characters are good for this? Well, why don't we take a look? So some characters that are good for this. Characters that would be good for this include Arver 9000 Chan, as we just showed. Other characters could be Archon is a good character to put as your lead, because Archon does multiple hits with her meteors, and she also does a lot of damage while the boss is stunned with her electric orbs. Another good character would be, another good character would be a lot of hunters, actually. A lot of hunters are good characters. For example, Dart is a really good character, because Dart, when she does consecutive fire, which is her block skill, she fires, several bullets, and those bullets, each of those bullets will do 1,000 damage. So Dart is a really good character for this. Sneak is also a very good character who you can use for this level, and other good characters also include a lot of mages. So mages like Sasquatch, for example, a 4-star Sasquatch could do this boss very well, because when he launches his block skill, he drops about 9 icicles per 1 chain, but up to like 20 some icicles for a 3 chain. So Sasquatch is really good for this dungeon if you time him correctly. There are some caveats to using Sasquatch. You have to wait until the boss turns on his shield, and I'll show you real quickly. There are some caveats using Sasquatch, but we'll get to that in a second. Rachel could also, actually, and this is one of the uses for Rachel. In fact, I don't like Rachel in many circumstances, but 4-star Rachel actually does decently against this boss. Not amazingly, but she does decently, because she uses this skill called Bat Storm, and Bat Storm does multiple hits to the enemy. So those are some examples of good characters against the boss. And those are just 4-star examples. You don't have to use a 4-star character, though. You can actually use 3-star characters. For example, if we go to the tome, we'll take a look at some characters which are really good for fighting the Gravity Dungeon boss. Usually not warriors as your DPS unit. Usually you want to use some good characters would have, like for example, archers. Any archer that has the same block skill as Arver 9000 Gem, like right here, which is called Driving Arrows. So any archer with Driving Arrows is really good for the boss. And other archers that have this skill include 3-star heroes. So you could use, for example, the Polar Sniper if you have her. She does Driving Arrows, which will do a lot of damage to the boss. So even though she's only a 3-star character, that doesn't matter. What matters most in this case for finishing off the boss is the fact that she does a 3-chain Driving Arrows, which is multiple arrows, which shoots multiple arrows at the enemy, and each of those arrows is going to do 1,000 damage when she does the correct chain. So if I had a Polar Hunter and I used her in this dungeon, I would do 20,000 damage per correct chain with the Polar Hunter. That is really great damage. So that is one example. I mean, you could even technically use a Konichi, who also has Driving Arrows. The difference between a 1-star and a 3-star simply being the fact that one is more survivable than the other. Can actually tank. You want them to be able to tank a few auto attacks. So I would recommend using a 3-star up character, but you can, in the most extreme circumstances, use a 2-star character. For example, I have used a Golden Archer with Driving Arrows and to kill a boss. It's just harder to keep him alive since he only has, maybe like 575 health. Other characters that are good would be, again, any hunter that has consecutive fire. So it could be like a 3-star Dart or a 4-star Dart. This also includes Sneak. Sneak also has consecutive fire. And then you have a lot of 3-star characters that have consecutive fire. I think the ones I can remember are... Let's see. I think the Gangster has consecutive... Yeah, this Private Thug has consecutive fire as one example. And this Southern Guard has consecutive fire. So any hunter with consecutive fire would be good. In terms of the mages, you have a lot of options. Again, we talked about Archon, we talked about Sasquatch, we talked about Rachel. Even Corrin and Lilith would be just fine. Lilith is a little bit actually more dicey on levels before floor 9, but she'd be just fine. So basically, any mage with Bat Storm, any mage with Freezing Blizzard, and mages that have meteors. Meteor Shower is okay. It's not as great as the other ones. In fact, I'd prefer a wizard that has Freezing Blizzard, like this female Neth Army female executive right here, because it drops a lot of icicles. But as you can see, like there are a lot of 3-star characters that have these skills. So if you don't have one of those 4-star characters, you can still use 3-star characters, and they'll do just fine. Now, in terms of other strategies for Bread Dungeon, you'll see that my team composition right now is 2 priests and 1 DPS character, who is usually my lead. So, for example, here I'm going to use 2 priests and let's bring a 3-star Neth female army executive who has the Freezing Blizzard skill. Now, the idea behind this is you don't necessarily even need 6-star priests. The only reason you're bringing 2 priests instead of more DPS units is because you want your blocks to line up nicely. I mean, if you only have 1 good priest and you need to bring like another priest, that's fine. Bring like you can bring like a random 4-star or like even a random 3-star priest. Like let's just say a 3-star Maria, and that's fine. The idea here is actually more importantly the fact that you want your blocks to line up neatly so you can do the proper chain of the boss. In this case, this is the Darkfire Giant on floor 9. We want to use 3 chains. So let's go ahead and go with this example. So I'm using 2 3-star characters and 1 6-star priest. So again, the idea here is that bringing 2 priests allows you to line up your blocks nicely for your DPS character. You don't accidentally have to hit the wrong block against, because if you had 2 DPS characters, you might have been in a situation where you're going to have to use a bad block in order to stun or in order to do damage to the boss. But having 2 priests means that I can neatly line up these chains. So I can neatly put together these 2 chains and combine them with another 1 chain to build a 3 chain. And it's just consistency is what the priests offer you. It also allows you to heal up your party, of course. And usually you want at least 1 decent priest to, or at least like 1, 4-star priest to help keep your party alive. But as you can see, we're doing very fine with 2 random 3-stars. Now I'm going to have to start stunning this guy because he's starting to back us into a corner and he's dealing some damage to my characters. But, oh goodness. Alright. But as you guys can see, like I'm using this Freezing Blizzard thing and it is doing quite well. Now, see, he's getting stunned, he's taking damage. It actually is not ideal right now when he backed me up against the wall because he's actually slightly out of range. So that was kind of a poor example right now. You should, if you're going to use Freezing Blizzard, apparently you need to hit him a lot earlier, otherwise he's going to be out of range of your skill, making this very awkward. But you can, as you guys can see, you can do this with a 3-star character. Now ideally, these Freezing Blizzards wouldn't miss, and actually that was one problem I didn't anticipate hearing, because I usually do this very quickly. But, alright, we actually might fail this one. But you can use a 3-star DPSer. You just have to use them a lot faster than I was using it because I was too busy explaining, and I wasn't anticipating this problem. Alright. Yeah. So we're gonna actually leave this one because we messed that up a little bit. That's unfortunate. But we'll do that one more time to actually show how you're supposed to properly do it. But again, guys, the important thing is that you use the correct chain against the boss, and that you have 2 DPS, or you have 2 priests and 1 DPS character. One of the DPS characters that we listed before. And again, you want to make sure that you're using the correct chain on these boss. Whatever the boss asks for, use that chain. You can tell by just clicking on his portrait, he'll tell you what kind of chain he wants. Or you can watch him during the battle, and he'll scream out some number that you have to hit him with. Now, I'm going to bring Maria just in case things should go terribly wrong. But again, we're gonna bring. Let's just bring a 1-star priest because it doesn't really matter. All we really care about is the fact that we have 1 character to keep our party alive, and another character to do the DPS, and then a 3rd character who doesn't interfere with putting together the proper blocks. But if you should use the wrong chain against the bosses, again, you won't do any damage to the bosses, and you'll also amplify the boss's damage because you'll end up buffing him, which is pretty bad. So be careful about using the correct chain against the bosses. So what we're going to watch for here is, see, as his SP bar is filling up, you see these shields spinning around him. And he'll scream out in a second, what kind of chain he wants. So he says, give me 3 breads and I won't eat you. So hit only by 3 chains. You can see right there that he told you what he wants to get hit by. So that's what you hit him with. And you can see that each of the icicles, even though this is only a 3-star Neth female army executive, she's doing some pretty decent damage. Like, this guy's already almost down to, you know, 2/3 of his health, just off a few 3 chains. Now, I do have to be a little bit careful here because he's starting to back up my team against the wall. And once he backs up my team against the wall, it gets kind of awkward because apparently Freezing Blizzard doesn't hit this boss very well. So you have to play this a little bit. You have to keep kind of spamming out these blocks. And see, the 1-star priest died, and that's fine. It is not a big deal. Because again, the worst case scenario would be that we cannot hit the boss. That would be the worst case scenario, is that we can't hit the boss. But the worst case scenario is that we would have a secondary DPS character who is totally screwing up our chains and is forcing us to use blocks we don't want to against the boss. That would be the worst case scenario. So we're just slowly whittling down the boss right here, and but characters, you don't have to use Freezing Blizzard. In hindsight, Freezing Blizzard might not be the best skill to use on the character, but it does work, and we will kill this boss. Now again, other skills that you could use are mages with the meteors. You could use, oh, that actually just completely missed. Mages with the meteors. Mages with Batstorm. Batstorm won't miss like this. Batstorm does less instances of hits, but it won't miss like this at least. But yeah, this is floor 9. And so let's move on. So I think we talked about most of the strategy for how you're supposed to do this boss. And if you have any questions, you can always refer to the text that I have below. But let's talk about where should you farm in Bread Dungeon. Usually the best floor to farm in Bread Dungeon is this floor, is floor 9. And the reason floor 9 is so good is because floor 9 gives you a chance to get 3 to 6-star breads. Is the exact same reward that you can get for floor 8 and for floor 10, but the reason that I prefer farming floor 9 as opposed to floor 8 or floor 10 is because it is, in my opinion, the easiest floor to put together chains for. You can never mess up and accidentally get a 3 chain that you didn't want. Like, in floor 8, you need to use 2 chains on the bosses. But the thing about 2 chains is you can accidentally mess up, and if the 2 chain becomes a 3 chain, and then suddenly you have to use a 3 chain against the boss, which is the wrong number. So that's one reason I don't like floor 8. It's also a lot of characters automatically do 3 chains. Like, for example, Dart automatically can proc a 3 chain. Lilith can automatically proc a 3 chain. There are certain characters that automatically do 3 chains as a result of something else, as a result of their passive, which is why I like using them. Okay, so unfortunately, our Neth Army Executive died, and that's fine. We'll deal with it. I'll just use this time to talk about other things. But that's the reason I like farming floor 9, is because you can't mess up in terms of putting together 3 chains, is the first reason. The second reason is the reward. So on floor 8, floor 9, and floor 10, your reward is exactly the same. You can get a 3 to a 6-star bread. Of course, a 6-star bread being what you want the most. But floor 10 and floor 8 don't offer better or worse alternatives of bread. They don't offer better or worse rewards of bread than floor 9. Like, floor 10 is also much harder to accomplish than doing floor 9. And I'll at least talk through the details of how you do it. And actually, I'll give you an example of how you do it in just a second. But floor 10 is a lot harder and takes a lot more setup than floor 9, so which I don't recommend doing. And we have run several tests. There are a lot of people who've done tests with floor 9 and floor 10, and they found that the rewards are exactly the same. So it's not worth it, in my opinion, to set up to do floor 10, aside from just say, look, I beat floor 10. Now, and that's pretty much the reason why people farm floor 9 as opposed to floor 10, and sometimes even opposed to floor 8, but some people like floor 8. But anyways, I'll show you guys real quickly. Now, as you notice, I'm doing 0 damage to this boss. Like, I'm auto-attacking for 0 damage. If I was to use like 1 or 2 chains with a DPS character, I would also do 0 damage, and I would actually heal the boss as well. And you might be wondering, well, what is the point here? Well, one unique thing about the bosses is even though they're not hit by like physical damage or magical damage, they are still damaged by neutral damage. This is kind of one of the more advanced mechanics. And this is actually how you beat floor 10 if you're so inclined to beat floor 10. So, for example, if I use the goddess Bella, she converts all of my damage into neutral damage. So for example, if I use Bella right now, you'll see that suddenly Maria is auto-attacking for 73 damage. And that's because she was doing 73 neutral damage. If I ever get stuck in this situation, technically I could play this out really long term and just slowly do neutral damage over time, you know, doing like little hits of 73 damage over time and kill him. And that'd be fine. Now, what I'm actually going to do here, though, to really boost up the amount of neutral damage I'm doing from Bella, is I'm actually going to pop all of these blood donation stacks. And this is the technique for beating floor 10, is that you build up a bunch of transcendent blood donation stacks. And if you build up a lot of them, what happens is, if you use them all at once, Transcendent Blood Donation has a very unique ability that when Transcendent Blood Donation, you actually stack your damage, and it boosts your attack by 50%. As you see, the boss suddenly died. That was kind of weird, huh? Well, Transcendent Blood Donation, how it works is, when you have the Transcendent version of that skill, and it must be Transcended, it boosts your attack power by 50%. Now, what we did there is we stacked about 5 or 6 stacks of it. We actually stacked more, but you only need about 5 or 6 stacks of it. And if you stack that many, it keeps increasing your attack by 50% each time you apply a stack. And what ends up happening is you start attacking for somewhere around, you know, the 60 to 120,000 damage range with your auto attacks. And when you use Bella, Bella converts that into neutral damage that goes straight through the enemy's shield. So now you can suddenly start doing neutral damage to the boss. So you buff your auto attack super high, and then use Bella to boost your to turn it into neutral damage to actually hurt the boss. So that was actually how you would beat floor 10. Is that you actually bring 3 priests, and one of the priests has Transcendent Blood Donation, and you just boost your attack super high, and use Bella, and you'll eventually auto-attack. You'll actually auto-attack the bosses to death in pretty quick fashion after you stack about 6 Transcendent Blood Donation stacks. And you have to kind of wait for them all to accrue, but that would be the idea for how you beat floor 10. And again, the reason floor 10 is so hard is because it's of this. If you look at it, this boss says like use 3 chains, you know, use 2 chains. This boss says random defenses. You have no idea what kind of chain you're supposed to use on them, which is what makes this floor harder and why people don't do it. But if you want to beat it, the way you beat it is using Bella as your goddess and using 3 priests, with at least one of the priests having Transcendent Blood Donation. But yeah. So I think I've covered a lot of topics on how to do the Chili Bread Dungeon, what kind of techniques you need to use, bring a character whose block skills do multiple hits, you know, like Dart, like Sasquatch, like Rachel, like Archon, or like a hunter with consecutive fire, or any archer like R over 9000 who has driving arrows as their block skill. Make sure you use the correct chain against the boss by either watching them called out or by reading their description and seeing what chain you should hit them with. And yeah, and if you want to increase your damage, bring Bella, and you can do neutral damage to the boss with Bella. And you can also do damage to the bosses when you stun them by using the correct chain. And yeah, that I think about covers it for what I want to talk about for Chili Bread Dungeon. If I missed anything, I'll definitely put them in the comments of this guide, and you can take a look at those. But anyway, guys, I hope that helped. I know starting out the game is definitely difficult to do this dungeon, and a lot of people, the primary mistake they do when they come to these dungeons is they accidentally bring a character, like, you know, they bring their typical team of, you know, Leon, a priest, like an archer and a priest, and they end up taking, you know, 20 minutes to do the dungeon because they're using, you know, they're doing like 2 attacks per correct chain, and that's one of the major pitfalls they run into. But yeah, I hope you guys avoid that by telling you to bring, you know, a party of 2 priests and 1 DPS character, and hopefully your bread dungeon farming goes well. But guys, thanks for watching, and yeah, cheers.